Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. It's a great honor for me to be here in Ifat University. I was first here in this hall 40 years ago when I came from England with our small baby boy Saleh. Alhamdulillah, I've now been married to my husband, Sultan Ghalib Al Qu'aity, for nearly 40 years. And I live in Jeddah. And the reason why I travel to England is to supervise the activities of my charity, Asdiqa Hadhramaut, the Friends of Hadhramaut, which is mentioned in the flyers, which I hope you've all picked up on the table outside. I can talk a little bit about my charity after the film. I always like to dedicate my lecture to perhaps the most outstanding muallim from Hadhramaut, al-marhum al-muallim Muhammad bin Laden. I would also like to dedicate this lecture to a very great muallim in Tarim who supervised all the projects for our schools, classrooms, sewing centers, clinics, both with the mud brick and with stone, Karama Ubaid from Tarim. I salute these two great muallim from Hadhramaut. Karama Ubaid did so much for Friends of Hadhramaut in helping us achieve our projects. The film that you're going to see by Caterina Borelli, it's already about 8 years old. It's about 12 years old. And it's quite a long film, it's an hour long, but I want you to appreciate the silences and the stillnesses in the film. I urge any one of you, especially those who have an interest in architecture, to find an architecture comparable to the mud skyscrapers of Shibam and the mud architecture of Hadhramaut. The Hadramis, and I'm sure a lot of you are of Hadrami ancestry. I'm sure a lot of you have either a parent, a grandparent, an ancestor, or even a relative who is of Hadrami ancestry. Could we have a show of hands, if you don't mind? I'd just like to see how many of you have or know of your Hadrami ancestry. Could you raise your hands a bit high because the hall's quite dark? Mashallah, I would say almost half the auditorium. The Hadramis are basically a very conservative people, and they are very traditionalist. They feel their Islamic identity very strongly. Their land, Hadhramaut, is littered with pre-Islamic prophets and patriarchs, and the Hadramis have somehow harmonized their past. Their past is still very much alive and still with them. If you look at the buildings, if you look at the posters that I've made and put outside in the entrance hall, if you look at the way they dress, their food habits, their culture, and above all, of course, building is in their lifeblood. Their mud brick architecture is unique. The master builder's philosophy is very simple. Cement is hot and mud is cool. Now, if we look at the first map, if we look at the first map, you can see that in the present Republic of Yemen, the Muhafidha, or the governorate of Hadhramaut, is the largest governorate in the present-day Republic of Yemen. If you look at this very nice map that Khulud kindly found for me, you will see that Hadhramaut proper, or Greater Hadhramaut, spans the area slightly east of Aden, all the way to Mahra and the Omani border. You will see that Hadhramaut has a coastline on the Arabian Sea. And if you look at Yemen, you could see that that very much belongs to the Red Sea. From the coastline of Hadhramaut, which you can see spans most of the South Arabian littoral, Hadramis have throughout the centuries, well before Islamic times, from the times of antiquity, have sailed across into the Indian Ocean. And if I go to this map, which doesn't actually show the extent of its communities, I will stay on this map for a while. The communities where Hadhramaut exported its manpower, its men, are to be found in Singapore, in India, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, Java and Sumatra, of course, in East Africa, in the Comoro Islands in the Indian Ocean, in the Maldives Islands in the Indian Oceans, and in the Seychelles. Hadrami communities have also been found in Mindanao, in the Philippines, and even in China. In South Africa, as far south as Cape Town, the oldest mosque there is believed to have been founded by a Hadrami. What's interesting is that because of this great Hadrami diaspora, you will find many families of the same name in different countries. For example, about a decade ago, there was a minister in the Indonesian government by the name of Alatas. At the same time, in Kenya, halfway across the world on the East African coast, there was a minister by the same name. And can you imagine, they both lived in opposite ends of the world, but they can all trace their ancestry to Horeida, of course, in Hadhramaut. Now, Hadhramaut's early importance came from its place in the incense trade. The Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians all used incense for funerals and for mummification. Shabwa, which is, I would say, roughly near the Mim of Hadhramaut, or between the Mim and the Ra of Hadhramaut, Shabwa was one of the cities lining the caravan trail. It formed part of the spinal cord of the incense route for 1,000 years. As burial replaced cremation, and as Christianity replaced the pagan religions of the area, we witness the demise of the incense trade. In a 1st century AD account by a Greek sailor called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, he talks about ancient Sabatha, which we recognize as being present-day Shabwa. Pliny, the famous Greek historian, says that there were more than 60 temples in Shabwa. The name of the dance, the Shabwani, which some of you may know, still perpetuates the name of Shabwa, and the salt mines which have been quarried since ancient times still exist. Now, to understand the importance of Hadhramaut in ancient times, you have to understand how important the frankincense or luban was. Frankincense in Latin is Boswellia sacra, and it still grows in the secluded wadis and alleys, gullies of Hadhramaut. The first European to record the frankincense tree was Alexander the Great's commander, Androsthenes. Theophrastus of Eresos, another Greek scholar, mentions it in his botanical work. The other commodity that was exported to Rome and Greece and the Mediterranean lands was myrrh, or mur in Arabic, in Latin, Comifera balsamodendrus. Now, Wadi Hadhramaut that you're going to see in the film, if you look at the map now, is 700 kilometers above sea level, and it's only 100 miles from the Arabian Sea. At its widest point, it is only 15 kilometers wide, and near Tarim, it is quite narrow. It is only 2 miles wide. There's a very interesting feature in Hadhramaut called the Jol, a geological feature for those of you who are interested in geography. On the table outside, there's a very nice card of the Jol, which is basically an endless plateau of reddish-brown crystalline limestone. And few people realize that this plateau between the Arabian Sea and the Rub al-Khali makes up 90% of the landmass of Hadhramaut. So whereas the wadis look very deep and very impressive and very widespread, it is the Jol, which is the basic geographical feature of the Hadhramaut. Now, in the film that Caterina Borelli made, which won a prize at the Museum of Modern Art in America in 1999, you will see Sayoun, and you will see Tarim, and you will also see Madinat Hadhramaut, Shibam. Shibam is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But I would like to tell you a little bit about the coastal cities of Al-Mukalla and Ash-Shahr. Oops. Can you all see the Arabic writing on the screen? Can you find Ash-Shahr and Al-Mukalla? In one of the travel books written by a British writer called The Coast of Incense, this is how she describes Mukalla as you approach it from the Arabian Sea. Anything more picturesque than its approach you cannot imagine. Tall houses, every shade of white and grey, piled together against the red cliff. Al-Mukalla was the capital of the Qu'aiti State till the Communist Revolution in 1967. Daniel van der Meulen, who is quoted in the film and was the Dutch consul in Jeddah, says this about Hadhramaut: an unreal, forgotten bit of paradise, waiting for the day of judgment, safely shut off from the world. Sayoun is only 2 hours' flight from Jeddah. It's quite easy to visit it by air. Now, Al-Mukalla is by far the largest port on the Hadhramaut coast east of Aden. It's built at the foot of the Jabal Qara, but of course Ash-Shahr was the original port of Hadhramaut and much more ancient. It is further east to Mukalla, as you can see on the map, and was 1 day's camel journey closer to Wadi Hadhramaut. Ash-Shahr is mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea by the Greek sailor and by Marco Polo. Much of its population, as its importance dwindled, emigrated here to Saudi Arabia and to East Africa. The sarongs and the futas that you see maybe in the film and the hand-woven baskets mostly come from Shahr. I wish I had time today to go into the history of the famous sea vessels, the dhows, the huris, the bagalas, and the sambuks, which navigate this coastline. The fish souks in Mukalla and Shahr are absolutely amazing. you can find hammerhead sharks next to sardines, tuna, and crayfish. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the dried shark meat, the lakham. Another town I want to mention, which you can see on the map, northeast of Mukalla, is Ghail Bawazir. Ghail Bawazir has been very famous as a center of learning, Madinat Ilm, and for growing the famous good quality tobacco, which is called Humumi. The area around Ghail is very fertile and very agricultural. For those of you who are interested in architecture, you will see many different kinds of architecture in the film. Indian colonial, Mughal, neoclassical, Baroque, Rococo, and Indo-Victorian, and even early modernist styles of architecture. I'd like to say something about the famous Islamic figures of Hadhramaut. I'd like to mention perhaps the most famous prophet, Nabi al-Hud alayhi salam. Qabr Nabi al-Hud is at the turning of Wadi Hadhramaut with Wadi Masila. So it's right at the end of Wadi Hadhramaut, in the eastern part of Hadhramaut, where it makes a sharp bend into Wadi Masila and has the most stunning location. Please look at the pictures of Qabr Nabi al-Hud in the foyer. The other very famous site of Nabi Allah Saleh alayhi salam is Qabr Nabi Allah Saleh, which is in Wadi Sar, which is off Wadi Khonab. As you know, Nabi Hud was sent to Bani Ad, and Nabi Saleh was sent to Bani Thamud. And if you look at Thamud, which is right up in the top of the map, you can see that there is a place in the Rub al-Khali which is named after Bani Thamud, to whom Nabi Saleh was sent. When you look at Wadi Duan in the film, you will see that the village of Hadun is named after the son of Nabi Hud, and the village of Danyal is named after Nabi Hadun. The other famous person to be buried in Hadhramaut is Sayyid Ahmad bin Isa al-Muhajir, the famous spiritual leader who came to Hadhramaut in the 10th century from Basra in Iraq, and is the ancestor of the Sayyids of Hadhramaut. And is Dr. Haifa here? Yes. And so Dr. Haifa, he is in fact probably one of your ancestors, inshallah. I'd just like to say that it's very interesting about Dr. Haifa's family, because Dr. Haifa Jamal al-Layl can trace her ancestry to Hadhramaut. But what's interesting is that one branch of the Salatin in Malaysia, because there are, I think, nine or eight states which make up Malaysia, and the sultans, they rotate in turn to become the rulers of their country, and one of the sultans is a Jamal al-Layl. Yeah. To know the Hadrami people is to really appreciate the diaspora, where all the Hadramis have traveled to and where they have settled. When I was last in Hadhramaut, we met a fisherman in a sheher whose brother was a truck driver in Milan, in Italy, and whose other brother owned a grocery store in New York. I'm trying to give you an idea of this tremendous diaspora. And what is it that distinguishes these Hadramis? when they go and settle in these far-flung lands, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Singapore, it's that somehow they have adapted and adopted, they have adapted into their local communities, and they have sort of adopted also from their local communities by marrying amongst the local population. They have become, as it were, localized, integrated. And yet, as many of you of Hadrami origin will know, they do retain some very touching and emotive Hadrami facets in their culture, the way they eat, the way they dress, their religious customs, for example. So whereas they've gone halfway across the world, they've still retained their Hadrami identity. So if you look at Hadhramaut on the map, you can see that it is actually geographically, especially Wadi Hadhramaut and Wadi Duan, culturally isolated. And yet, from this cultural isolation and this very close geographic situation, they have woven relationships with people all across the Indian Ocean basin and beyond. This is what is so remarkable. I have been told, and my husband will correct me, because for 40 years of living with him, he is my best teacher, alhamdulillah, that there are more people of Hadrami origin in Saudi Arabia and in Indonesia than in Hadhramaut itself. That's something which you all have to think about. I'd like you to pay attention to the music in the film as well. I just want to mention that Hadhramaut, as well as being mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ahqaf, which could be translated in English as the land of the winnowing sands, the whole area of the Rub al-Khali, and the branch of the Rub al-Khali which comes into Hadhramaut, the Ramlat al-Sabatain. Why a Sabatain? Why Ramlat al-Sabatain? Because one Sabah was the capital, was in Marib, and the other Sabah was Shabwa, the capital of ancient Hadhramaut. And as I said to you, Pliny and the Greek geographers Strabo and the Roman geographer Herodotus all mention Hadhramaut in their writings. In the Bible also, in the Christian Bible, Hadhramaut is mentioned in the book of Genesis, and there he is spelt and known as Hadhramaut. And his son, Gahtan, is mentioned in the Bible as Joktan, which is the biblical equivalent of Gahtan. I wish I had time to talk about all the other things which fascinate me about the Hadhramaut. The hard-working people whose origins lie in the rocky fastnesses of the hills and the sleepy villages of the wadis. The people who left these rocky fastnesses and worked very hard and, of course, became very wealthy. I'd like also, if I had time, to talk about the emigrants who went halfway across the world to seek their fortune and who made it, and also the religious scholars who went halfway across the world and did so much to bring Islam to these far-flung communities. As I said, they all somehow remain unmistakably Hadrami, and it's not just by their names that you can identify them. Their names are not the only giveaway. Hadhramaut has always exported men, traders, and religious scholars. I wish I had time to talk about the Hadrami system of farming and irrigation. Please look out for that in the film. The flora and fauna of Hadhramaut is very rich, and especially the bird life. The crops are very interesting. a lot of fruits and vegetables, you will be surprised, grow in Hadhramaut. The cosmetics of Hadhramaut are very interesting, and their crafts. The dress, the dance, and the music of Hadhramaut. If some of you had come to the wonderful Umsiyat Hadhramiya organized by the group of Jeddah ladies, Sadiqat Al Khair, where Madam Safiya bin Zagar and I were judges for the 5 best Hadrami dresses, I wish some of you could have come and seen the beautiful Hadrami dresses and silver jewelry. I've spoken about their eating habits and their religious habits, but you must understand, Hadrami culture is much deeper than just Madbi and Mandi. It's much deeper than that. The vast number of ancient graves that you find in Hadhramaut, the shrines and sanctuaries, the tombs, the giants' graves, the most famous of which is the giant grave at Mawla Matar. Their tribes and their social structure is also very interesting. Their coffee, the indigo, the henna. Across the Jol, you find these very interesting open water holes which collect rainwater, which the tribes can drink from and which are known as kharifs. The minerals in Hadhramaut are